They didn't come for soldiers. That's the part I keep returning to, even now. The Varith Compact chose Tessavon-Four because it had no garrison, no militia post, no orbital watch. Just 7 agricultural clusters strung across a river delta, 41,000 people who grew grain and raised children, and had never once thought to arm themselves because nothing in 30 years of settlement had ever given them a reason. We were a footnote world, a dot on a transit chart, the kind of place a raider's logistics officer circles and marks with a single character, meaning low resistance, high yield, expendable. I was 3 days out on a soil survey run when they came in. I heard the fire before I saw it. Southern cluster first. That was home. And by the time I crested the ridge above the delta, the granary towers were already down. I watched from that ridge for longer than I should have. I told myself I was assessing. The truth is I couldn't move. The Varith ships, 8 of them, mid-weight haulers refitted with suppression arrays, were moving cluster to cluster in a pattern so routine it was insulting. No tactical precision, no urgency. The way a maintenance crew moves through a job they've done 100 times. They finished in 3 days, then they left. I came down from the ridge on the 4th morning and walked through what was left of the southern cluster for 6 hours. I counted what I could count. I stopped when I understood that counting would take weeks I didn't have, and a steadiness I'd already spent. I found 2 other survivors in the outer clusters. A woman named Pell, who'd been in the eastern irrigation channels when the ships came over, and a boy of 9 whose name I won't put here because he's alive somewhere, and his life is his own. We shared what rations I'd carried on the survey run. We waited 11 days for the quarterly supply ship. When it came, the crew thought we were ghosts. I gave my testimony at Kashari Station 14 days after that. I gave it again at Fleet Command on Novara. I gave it a 3rd time before the Interstellar Settlement Authority's Oversight Board, and that time I brought the only thing I'd managed to document from the ruins. A Varith transit log, partial, recovered from a downed atmospheric drone that hadn't made it back to the haulers. The log listed Tessavon-Four under a compact operations category that translated, roughly, as uncontested resource extraction. There was no casualty figure, no action report, no record of 41,000 human beings. They hadn't even bothered to count us. The authority board was quiet for a long time after I finished. One of the commissioners, an older man, career diplomat, the kind of face that had weathered 100 hard briefings, set his hands flat on the table and looked at the transit log and did not look up again for nearly a minute. When he did, he said 7 words to the room. Pull every Varith compact holding on record. I didn't know then what that order would become. I learned. The Warden Tide assembled over 4 months. I was present for the final muster at Kashari Deep Anchorage, 830 warships in formation above the planet, where what was left of my settlement authority still had its offices. I stood on an observation deck and tried to find language for what I was seeing and couldn't. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot and it burns out. What the Warden Tide represented was something colder and more permanent. The full arithmetic of what humanity feels when it decides a thing cannot stand. Every hull in that formation had a name painted on its bow. Fleet Command had requested names from the Tessavon-Four survivor registry. We'd compiled 38,000 before the survey data degraded. They painted what they had. The ships went out named. I rode with the ground element at Admiral Soren Hale's invitation. She told me she didn't make that offer often, and she meant it seriously, and I should understand what I was agreeing to see. I told her I'd already seen the other side of it. She nodded once, and didn't say anything else, and I understood then that she and I were the same kind of tired. The Varith Compact's primary holding world was called Vathros in their tongue. It sat at the core of the outer Kashari belt, a mid-mass world with 3 moons and a surface mostly given over to dry savanna. The Compact operated 17 major installations on its surface. Administrative centers, resource processing hubs, the compound where their raider logistics ran its route planning, the archive halls where they kept their operational records. The Warden Tide came out of transit above Vathros in full formation at 0600 local surface time. I understand there was an attempt at communication. There usually is. The Compact's orbital defense platforms went active within 8 minutes of our arrival and were neutralized within 11. After that, there was a 17-minute window during which the Compact's Senior Administrative Council broadcast 6 separate requests for terms. Fleet Command logged all 6. Admiral Hale's response was transmitted once, in the Compact's own primary dialect, at 0634. You didn't file a record, we brought one. Then the Warden Tide went to work. I was on the surface with the 3rd ground element by 0900. Our specific task was the Compact's primary archive complex, a low, sprawling building at the edge of the capital installation, climate-controlled, surprisingly well-maintained. The Verith kept good records of everything they considered worth keeping. I walked through their holdings for 2 hours, with 4 Marines and an intelligence officer named Tessavon-Four, who had the kind of professional calm that I'd come to recognize as the specific gift of people who have made their peace with necessary things. We found the operational logs for approximately 400 Compact Raider actions going back 60 years. Tessavon-Four was in there, eventually, logged under the same category as the transit drone. Uncontested resource extraction. Below it, a line recording the tonnage of grain recovered. Below that, nothing. Tessavon photographed every page and said nothing. By 1400 local time, 15 of the 17 surface installations were fully dismantled. The Warden Tide's orbital element was processing the 3 Verith deep space holdings simultaneously. The Compact's fleet, 22 ships, the same class of refitted hauler that had come to Tessavon-Four, had been intercepted at the belt's edge 4 hours before we arrived. They did not make it back. Admiral Hale had given one instruction to the ground element commanders before we deployed: find the senior-most Compact administrator on the surface and do not harm them. Bring them to the central square of the capital installation at 1600. We found him in a basement level of the logistics compound, an old male, by Verith standards, pale-ridged, slow-moving, wearing the administrative sash of a senior route planner. He was not the architect of Tessavon-Four specifically. He was the architect of the system that produced Tessavon-Four, and 200 actions like it. He understood this. I could see that he understood this from the moment we brought him into the light. They sat him in the square. They gave him a working communications array tuned to every frequency the Compact used across the outer Kashari belt, and they loaded into that array a single file, the Tessavon-Four Survivor Registry. All 38,000 names we'd managed to compile, read aloud in a continuous audio record at normal human speaking pace. It ran for 11 hours and 40 minutes. I stood there while they set it up. The administrator looked at me, at my face, I suppose, trying to read what I was, and I looked back at him and felt something I still don't have a clean name for. Not satisfaction, not relief, something quieter and more final, the way a door sounds when it latches from the inside. We sent 830 ships, I said. For 41,000 people, you didn't think we're worth a line of paperwork. He didn't respond. I hadn't expected him to. The Warden Tide completed its operations at Vathros at 0200 the following morning. I watched the last orbital pass from the deck of INS Dace's survey. They'd renamed the ship 4 months prior, and I still wasn't sure how I felt about that. 17 installations, 22 ships, 60 years of uncontested resource extraction, ended. Below us on the surface, somewhere in what remained of the capital square, an old administrator sat alone with a communications array, broadcasting 41,000 names into every frequency his people could hear. We left him there. Some things need a witness. The galaxy needed to hear what 41,000 people sound like when someone finally takes the trouble to count them. And the Verith Compact needed to learn, needed to sit with the learning for as long as that audio ran. What happens when you raid a world you consider too small to document? We are not small. We are simply patient, and we remember everything. And when we come with 830 ships and every name you couldn't be bothered to record. That is the record now. It stands in the Kashari Belt Archive, filed under the Compact's own category heading, with one amendment in the margin, entered by hand, by Admiral Soren Hale, on the day the Tide stood down, contested,